Okay, welcome everyone to the latest edition of Work Reduce Live. I'm pleased to be joined by a really exciting panel of folks. Today will be guest moderated by John Durham of Catalyst SF, which is a San Francisco-based branding agency. We are talking about a really salient and interesting topic today, which is the role of social platforms and disinformation for marketers and how brands can make good choices in what's a really challenging time and situation. So while we're waiting for all the participants to roll in, I'll put in a quick plug for Work Reduce. Work Reduce is a staffing and talent platform for the marketing industry. We would love to talk to you about making your marketing operations more efficient and effective through our services, including staff augmentation and our service desks, which allows task-driven execution of common tasks in the ad buying world on a subscription basis. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us. It's been really great to bring together this series of panels where we talk about issues that are really important in the industry right now. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to today's returning second-time guest moderator, John Durham, who is going to be leading a conversation and introduce our panelists as a starting point. Thank you. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Brian, and welcome out to the West Coast. I know you've gone from east to west, and good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are. This is such a topic that everyone thinks so much about today. You know, election toxicity, fraud, fake news, information, disinformation. People have such opinions on it, and I like what Brian and Work Reduce have done and brought really three smart, fun, interesting, engaging people to talk about it. Like any other person putting together a good panel, our pre-conversation was pretty exciting. Out of that came a lot of good stuff. And like anything else, we welcome your questions. We're very fortunate to have three really distinguished people. I encourage you to look them up on LinkedIn. You don't have to ask them to join, but they're really great to get the depth of their biography. Number one is Michelle Manafee, the editorial director of Digital Content Next. I actually think this is probably one of the biggest, probably Michelle, I'm gonna take a shot here, one of the, truly one of the surprise organizations that I think is serving what this business is about and where it's going. And she runs editorial director, which the stuff they put out, the conversations, they're worth following on Twitter alone. So I'm going to be able to plug in. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you.
Brian, who is the CEO of Gnome, N-O-M. This is a really pretty cool company. I didn't really know much about it. You know, I think every day we love learning. Cut his heart in digital business, AOL, comes from DataZoo, and came out of Zephyr, which I think is a very cool company. And basically, he's going to talk about precision, transparency with brands, and he lives in Chicago. So we got New York, Chicago. Now we're going to go south. We're going to go to Columbus, Georgia, to our third panelist, Catherine Hernandez-Blade. She's a senior vice president and communication officer at a company that most of us have heard of, literally Aflac. So welcome, Catherine. Welcome, Brian. Welcome, Michelle. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And again, if you have any questions, let Brian Dolan know. Just pop up in the chat box.
John, just so you know, it looks like your video has frozen for us. We can hear you okay, but a couple reports that
there is Comcast in San Francisco is all over the road. So as long as I stay on it, I'll come back. Awesome. First question, I'm looking down. So the IAB reports, and this is for Catherine and Michelle, the IAB reports that 90% of news organizations experienced major ad cancellations during COVID post-March 15th, even while seeing massive spikes in traffic jump. Understanding the significant impact of online misinformation and polarization and respecting to shifts and what's going on, we see either the funding of fake news or the defunding of journalism. What are possible solutions? What do you think, Michelle?
Well, I think what you started off with a really good topic, because what we saw at the start of COVID was an incredible spike in news consumption. And we see this around many big news cycles, where we'll see a massive spike, people rushing to their trusted news brands, and at the same time see advertisers vanish. And they either vanish, in the case of COVID, there were a lot of people canceling their advertising altogether, kind of a freeze and figure out, what to do next. But even around other major news topics, we often see a big issue with keyword blocking around the news. The reality is we need to get out into the market and really educate marketers on the fact that news is not the enemy. In fact, news is one of the places in which consumers are most highly engaged. It's one of the most trusted environments. And if you can take a good look at your keyword blocking and think about the context as bigger than I am next to a story about a medical concern, and think of it as the reader or the viewer here is highly engaged. This is someone coming to a trusted source, seeking out information at their time of need, and being adjacent to that content can only shed a better reflection on you, can only place you in a better light. The reality is that, we do see a mass exodus around controversial topics, but I'm sure we're going to dig into this a little deeper. Oftentimes, those topics can be really important for brands to be involved in the conversation, or to at least appear invested and caring about consumers' needs in those situations. So vanishing altogether isn't a good look. Catherine?
Catherine, would you like to weigh in? I think Michelle said some good points there.
Oh, excellent points. I just want to provide a statistic that was posted by Institute for Public Relations this morning, because as the person who interacts with the editorial media in my department, this is very, very relevant and very timely to me and my peer set. A University of North Carolina report found that the U.S. has lost 2,100 newspapers over the last 15 years, leaving 1,800 communities in a news desert without a local news outlet. That is frightening, and that contributes to the issue. We talked, and I was a little bit provocative in our setup call, but I truly feel that from a news perspective, as a news consumer, I would feel much more comfortable with more facts and fewer pundits. I don't need someone to tell me how to interpret the data and the facts. I really just want the facts. And we can't underestimate the news consumer to think that they need everything explained to them from a certain particular lens. It would be nice if the pendulum swung back to the 5 W's a little bit more and less chatter.
Well, that can go down lots of different roads, and we're going to come back to that in a minute or so. But Brian, based on that, what both have just said, what do you think the role of the trusted partner, the trusted brand in these conversations should be today? Let's set some expectations as to what that role is.
Yeah, well, I think, the problem that brands face is not the problem of whether they want to be aligned with news or not. They do not want to be aligned with fake news. They don't want to be aligned with conspiracy theories. They don't want to be aligned with news that is going to shed a negative light on the brand. News
But they overwhelmingly will choose Facebook over a trusted news brand.
Well,
tell me, explain.
So I can't speak to
the
that.
land of fake news.
But what I can speak to is if an advertiser has chosen that they want to engage with the topic of news, and they are afraid of engaging it, not because that news can be bad sometimes, but what they don't want to associate with is not only the bad content, but the bad source. And in the case of news, source matters, right? So if there is a car crash or a global pandemic, right, there is going to be bad news. And I think an advertiser that wants to engage with the news reading audience will be comfortable with that. But in talking about both sides of the political spectrum, there have been headlines recently where the Trump campaign had ads on Chinese state media, and the Biden campaign had on Russian, or I may have gotten those backwards, right? But the point is they were probably trying to hit a news audience, and they ended up aligning with not only bad content, but bad source. So to go back to the original question, as you choose technology partners that help you engage with large swaths of this content, you should be engaging with partners that are looking at not only content at scale, but sources at scale. And that's what you use technology partners for. That's what you use any media partner for, is to guide you. In the case of our company, we are a content targeting solution on YouTube. There's 500 million hours of video uploaded on YouTube every minute of every day. There is no way, unless it's your full-time job, that you can stay on top of that. So you keyword block, you say news isn't for me, and then back to the deleterious effects of defunding journalism. And now we have 2,100 newspapers that have gone out of business, probably not because people don't want to engage with news readers, but they don't know how to at scale. And that's where you need to choose your technology partners.
And I think those are all good points. So all of us impact advertising. All of us cut our teeth. I think about the effectiveness of advertising and, the effectiveness of good ads. Catherine, I'm going to come to you first on this one. Are ads still effective? Are they still are they still a good way to communicate to customers?
I would suggest it depends on the ad. And I would also suggest that you should know exactly how every stakeholder group is going to react to your ad and what action they will be inspired to take or not take as a result before you even run it, because the data is so rich that it would be advertising malpractice not to know exactly what's going to happen before you put it out there.
Anybody else want to weigh in? Obviously, I believe very much in the efficacy of advertising. So I'm going to be a bit biased here, but Michelle, Brian?
Well, obviously, I'm extraordinarily biased in this regard. So we definitely, a lot of our members undertake brand impact studies and, provide a great deal of data to back up Catherine's point that when well conceived of and well executed, and when tracked in an intelligent, analytic fashion, digital advertising is as effective as any form. The old adage, you can reach the right person at the right time in the right context, is absolutely true. It just takes a precision and a clarity that isn't just spray and pray.
Right.
I would say, obviously, you're talking to somebody that's biased, and if there's a memo that I haven't read in the trades today about advertising not being effective, I need to read it because I'm in trouble.
No, that did not happen.
But to build upon the earlier comment there, advertising is effective to the extent that you pay attention and curate it. If you are just absolutely, to use your words, pray and spray, you're broadcasting to a large audience. What you're not doing, you're doing a disservice to your brand because you're not paying attention to the content with which your brand is aligned, right? So if you wanted to hit a demographic audience and you're doing it in this digital world, which is highly accountable, but also highly disintermediated, right? You're going to place your brand next to content that's not worthy of your brand. And in the worst case scenario, that ad's ineffective in a bit of a hyperbolic scenario. You just wasted a lot of money. And in a disastrous scenario, you're on the cover of the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, next to terrorist recruiting videos because you just let your brand go out there. So all of this data exists and all of this curation is possible. And what brands are doing, I see by and large, is they are weighing how much can I pay for how responsible I want to be in a world in which I need scale. And that's a reckoning that, quite frankly, hasn't played out yet.
Well, many years, television always had the rule that if there was an airplane crash, all airline advertising came down for 72 hours because nobody in the news or wanted to see an airline ad because of sensitivity. And that was when we dealt with just television, radio, traditional media. Digital media has come along in that intimate personal space. And Michelle, I think you're right. I think digital is just the most intimate, personal, wonderful media there is because you do have that ultimate aperture of getting to people. Should we think about, should brands think about putting up that maybe airline mentality? Like, okay, I don't want to be around fake news. I don't want to be around stupid news, and I don't want to be around panelists because some people don't buy panels, but they need to buy Fox. They need to buy during the daytime. They need to buy CNN during the daytime. Is there some kind of filter or something that can be done against that?
Well, I'll take that question. I'll at least kick it off. I think broadly, I think to answer the very specific question, I think if you're an airline and there is a plane crash, maybe it is probably in pretty good taste to just not have airline ads for a while, and I kind of understand that. But if you're a brand that wants to engage with the news consuming audience, and there's protests and there's violence, and these are things in which brands sometimes, depending on the brand, want to have a voice, and it's very endemic to their brand to have a voice on it. It's authentic to their brand to have a voice on it. What they don't want, again, is to be on polarizing, fake, conspiracy touting sources, as well as content that they can't be trusted. So I actually had a conversation with an advertiser the other day, like a top 10 national advertiser, so blue chip, and they were like, well, what if we don't want to be next to protest content? And I'm like, well, if you're on, for instance, 60 Minutes and they were covering some protests, would that be okay with you? And they were like, well, yes. And I go, okay, so let's talk about not only the content you want to be associated with, but let's talk about the source, and let's curate both, because a piece of content that doesn't seem unoffensive from I'll just pick like 4chan, that's not okay for a brand either, right? At least most brands that I know. So I hope I didn't upset anybody in the audience, but this is what I believe brand needs to do. Broad blacklisting of terms takes you completely out of conversations, and it also takes you to audiences who are less engaged.
And I'm definitely going to take Catherine's earlier point, assuming that the customer is not smart, which I think is a horrible assumption. I know due to time, we're welcome to questions, but there's two that I really do want to get to and have all of you weigh in. One of the hottest things going on right now is TikTok, Oracle, Microsoft, China government, Trump stepping in, all sorts of stuff. I am assuming, and I'm trying to get the latest, that TikTok has selected Oracle. Michelle, I think I got it right, as a trusted technology partner.
Yeah, they're kind of trying to skirt the legalese there, I think, right?
I don't know what TTP means, or TTP.
They're trying to say, because Oracle's involved, you don't have to worry about China.
Got it. What do you think what do you think this means for the industry? Because TikTok is
between us, I think this very odd machinations of Trump around TikTok. I'm not even going to try to venture into the inner workings of that individual's brain. But when we look at TikTok, as we do with any social media platform, I mean, the engagement is off the charts. Right. I can't imagine being a brand out there who isn't thinking about TikTok, particularly when you're looking at the younger demographic. I think that there are brands actually putting out TikToks that are incredibly engaging and really attracting those audiences, and it'll be effective for them to use TikTok. At the same time, I can't entirely negate the issues and the concerns around data, which for me persist across many platforms, right, including of course Google and Facebook, because the data there is arguably as bad as that of TikTok. The data concerns, they just don't involve a foreign government.
There's no doubt Facebook and Google beg significantly more in this conversation piece, because I think, I definitely think you're right.
But TikTok is fun and kids love it. And check out the Washington Post on TikTok. Dave Jorgensen is amazing.
It's definitely the future. Do you want to weigh in, Brian? Any comment on TikTok as you see it from your point of view?
I mean, I have three perspectives on TikTok. One is a consumer, one is a father, and one is somebody who makes a living in the advertising business. Speaking as a father, I won't let my daughter install it because I'm a bit of the mindset where there's smoke, there's fire. So she learns all TikTok dances live and in person from her friends, socially distanced, of course, with face masks. But and as a consumer, I'd be worried about installing it on my phone. As I'm kind of concerned just in general. I would say I'm a privacy. I'm not at the leading edge of privacy in terms of what I install on my phone, but I don't take unnecessary risks. And then in advertising, I would just say this. I think TikTok is probably going to have to go much further than trying to cloth themselves in the veil of Oracle to solicit advertisers en masse, because I don't, and this is just speaking in an opinion, I'm not a brand, right? I work with them. I think if you're worried about being next to content, and if the source of that content matters and it actually keeps you away from engaged audience in terms of news, the platform is one layer down. What if this platform is somehow compromising national security? And what does it say about your brand potentially funding that?
What if your social media platform is radicalizing young people? I mean, you just said you were on a platform that it is well documented.
Right.
It does that, and you're active on that platform. Just because it's owned by someone in the United States doesn't mean they're virtuous.
No, and good point. And I wouldn't suggest that they're necessarily virtuous. But what I'm saying is there's a third-party ecosystem of technology partners that can keep you on the content. And again, that's what my company does. I don't know that such an ecosystem of content targeting technologies can exist on TikTok, and just saying, hey, come deploy your brand here and we're going to grade our own homework is going to be enough for brands. That's just my opinion.
Agreed.
All right.
Sure. I want to know if Catherine Affleck is on.
Yeah, she should have a much better point than me on this.
I feel like she's going to know better than both of us.
I want to go, Catherine, to something that you and I talked about, and I think Michelle's brought there. All of this leads to, I personally am so tired, and it's not about my opinion, but the term influencer marketing. What does that actually mean? I mean, Michelle, we're all laughing, is it working? And we've got some great questions coming up, but influencer marketing, which is obviously what I think the social platforms are really driving. You can see all the money that's going there. You see how brands are using it. What are your thoughts on this? Is it just, the word cringes me. Our business is to influence.
Well, you all raised such interesting points, and I can see where in the previous question the premise could be applicable, whether it was a state actor or just a company that has an app that people are downloading. In regard to your question, John, we have a very long-standing commitment to pediatric cancer research and treatment. Over the past 25 years, we have donated $150 million to the cause. The Aflac Cancer and Blood Disorders Center at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta is the #1 provider of care for children with sickle cell in the United States.
Right.
It is also a top 10 pediatric cancer hospital in the United States. And September is Childhood Cancer Awareness Month, which is why I bring this up, and it's germane to the story I'm about to tell. So we tend to do a large number of events in September to bring awareness to the cause. And when I first came on board, we were doing Twitter parties. Do you guys remember when that was a big deal? You would have a Twitter party with an influencer. And when I peeled back the onion on it, I became very upset because we were paying people who were in some cases just celebrities for the sake of being a celebrity, had not contributed to the cause, didn't really concern themselves the other 364 days of the year with children with cancer. And we were paying them to have these Twitter parties, and I found it very distasteful. I thought, it's not authentic. We're paying these people to pretend like they care about kids with cancer. And I put a stop to it. And since then, if you look at our true engagement, our true grassroots digital engagement through people who care, who are dedicated, the child life professionals, the oncologists, the people who work with these amazing families and these beautiful children day in and day out. Guess what happened? Our engagement scores went through the roof, which speaks to this whole thing around authenticity. So if an influencer can be authentic in a space, then I think it is meaningful and it matters. But I also feel like that if it's disingenuous in any way, people will be able to spot a phony a mile away.
That's
And
such
that's
a good
not what
point.
you want associated with your brand. Yeah.
It's great advice for any brand too, because that authenticity, for example, something Brian mentioned was around the protests and Black Lives Matter. When you look at a brand like Nike with a long history, with a storied history of aligning with racial justice causes, they best be in there. They best be right in there saying giving their meaningful messages and communicating with their audiences. But that's authentic from that brand. Authenticity is critical. Agreed entirely.
Well, I think Brian Dolan's going to take us to a question.
Yeah, so we've got one from Ace going back to the role of platforms. How do ad networks actually play into this, right? It's like, content targeting is all good, but to read Ace's questions, like the ad networks seem to be moving a lot of user flow. And I think a lot of us know that ad networks are an important part of the whole ecosystem. What about the networks versus the platforms? How does that
We have
play
an ad
into-
network, so I'm just going to be honest and say we have one, TrustX. It's DCNs, it's members only. So you know what brands where you're gonna appear kind of right out of the gate. I'm pretty sure Brian is gonna address this better than I am, but I do think choose your partners wisely in this one.
Well, yeah, good advice. Choose your partners wisely. I think one of the biggest mistakes a brand or an advertiser can make is confusing platforms and publishers. And so when we're dealing with, YouTube is a platform, Facebook is a platform, the New York Times is a publisher. Ad networks, to a certain extent, are platforms in that they aggregate an enormous amount of content and deploy ads against it. I don't know how necessarily, I don't know how to say the ad networks are complicit in this necessarily, because ad networks, in my experience, at least publicly, I worked for one years ago, advertising.com, which was when I was at AOL. We do not kind of pretend to be publishers. What we do pretend to be, or what they do pretend to be, is audience aggregators. And I would continually suggest that the pendulum, especially in a digital world where this targeting of audience, either on a first party or third party basis, is possible, the pendulum is swung too far in favor of audience, and it needs to be balanced by your content.
Like content and context,
Content,
right?
yeah. So it's not, if you
want to be in a good environment.
Just trying to hit an audience, we're going back to what you said, Michelle, earlier. You're praying and spraying. You're like, I'm trying to hit this group of people, and I don't care where I hit them.
No, but your point is completely accurate. We've gone too far down that path because we did. And now we need to step back and say there's more, the picture has to be, as Catherine said, a little bit more strategic than that.
Yeah, in a more benign example, there's so much micro-targeting that is actually possible, or at least theoretically possible in a digital world, that sometimes I will talk to an advertiser and I'll listen to them put all their conditions of targeting layers they want to put on top of an ad. And I go, this would probably be better if you just printed out some flyers and handed them out to the 10 people that you're going to hit by targeting at this level. Because, and again, so this audience targeting and cutting it this way and first party data and all that stuff, again, it's sometimes you do this at the expense of content, and content is where brands lose their way, being aligned with the bad, unbrand suitable, unbrand safe content. And that, again, I think there's a balance to be struck that needs to swing back a little bit.
And I think all three of you brought up some really fascinating points. I love context versus not versus, but make sure you put it together. Think about where you are. And I really like that comment about publishers and platforms. And obviously, that's something to think about.
John, we have a closely related question
Okay.
that came in from Claire Atkin, who was one of our prior panelists and who's doing some very interesting work, I think, in this space. And she says, hey, what resources are available to advertisers to differentiate between legitimate news versus disinformation or fake news? And who are the leaders in this space? So maybe Catherine, actually, is that something that you guys are thinking about? Are you looking to kind of tell the difference between various sources?
Is there a resource that you use to help you to navigate that? Like, I would love to know the answer myself.
So I do have an answer, a little bit of an answer. So we actually just released through our content targeting technology, what we call a trusted news package. And we use third-party media watchdogs that grade news sources on bias, as well as accuracy. And I'll tell you what we did. And we literally aggregated these lists, and then we analyzed them, not through data science, but actually as media professionals, right? And we said, okay, super biased, super inaccurate, fake news, conspiracy theory touting. And I'm talking about like Ad Fontes Media. I'm talking about the Pew Research Center. I don't have any, there were 4 or 5 sources we used, but then we then applied kind of not only their scorecards on trusted news. And this is where we came up with like 60 Minutes and the Wall Street Journal and so on and so forth. I feel like every, by the way, news outlet I mentioned is somehow polarizing now. It's terrible that I feel that way, but
Fair.
setting that aside for a second. The answer to the question is the only way to do it is to ask the experts. And so in this case, we asked the experts on media bias, who should be trusted. And then we took our content targeting technology and applied it against those media outlets on YouTube and essentially cut everybody else out. And then we use common sense stuff like, hey, if an advertiser falls within this bias, but advertisers for some reason have boycotted this news outlet en masse over the last 2 or 3 years, let's just remove that from the package. So when we can sit there and talk to advertisers and say, here are the 5 media bias or media watchdogs we used. Here's how we applied our media expertise in terms of what advertisers would want. And then we plug it into data science, which then gives you the scale. So you get like the curation of human and the scale of data science. Now, that is our company, one solution on YouTube. But I would say there are ways in general for consumers to figure out what's a trusted news source. The problem being you have to do a little work to find it.
And there are a few out there. I know people, the old way that it validate television commercials for efficacy, like car companies would submit their creative against claims, primarily for FTC. You're onto something. You're one of the 4 or 5 companies that I know that are doing that. And Jim Conley, you're right. It's sort of your question there. I'll step in for Brian. It's sort of a combination of both. This is actually, to me, one of the big hot topics that is going to be addressed a lot further down the road. And Michelle's right. They're all looking for them. All right. I know in terms of time, this is a question that I always think all of us sometimes wonder. Post-COVID, post-March 15th, we all, I don't know, celebrated the word. We've now been ensconced, at least we have on the West Coast, 6 months. What keeps you up at night? What are the challenges that you're facing? Michelle, you obviously have Jason out there being a very big spokesperson, pushing the envelope.
I think Catherine brought up the one of the biggest ones for me, those news deserts. A dearth of news does not just hurt the industry I represent at Digital Content Next. The dearth of news deserts impact whether or not people choose to vote. I mean, that is a critical responsibility of every American. And when you don't have a local news outlet, you're less likely to vote. I mean, the direct correlation there is meaningful, and the outcomes could be devastating to us.
Can you say that again, what you just said?
I can share this research. There's research that proves that if you don't have a local news outlet in your community, you are far less likely to actually vote.
Can you please
Period.
send a link to that? That's something that we need to get out. I don't think people understand that. That was what Catherine said about the 2,100 newspapers, which I had to catch my breath. That's important to get out
So
there.
yes, I will absolutely share that with you. But the decline of the news industry is not just about Americans feeling that news is too partisan or too many pundits. I'm actually inclined to agree with Catherine there as well. I like my news fact-filled, less opinionated. But that said, you know, any news is essential for us to be fully responsible citizens, and that is critical. So yes, the death of news is absolutely keeping me up at night.
Catherine.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Brian for this save because I actually didn't hear the other Brian's question because my dog decided to go bananas.
I wanted the dog to come and join us.
It's still a possibility, and she came really close just a moment ago. So, Brian, thanks for the save, and thank all of you. This has been such a delightful discussion and such an important topic. Frankly, anything that ends, any sentence that ends in comma 2020 keeps me up at night. You know, we keep talking about unprecedented, and it is between the economics of this thing, between the pandemic and how it impacts people from their health perspective, their mental wellness perspective, their financial health perspective, how the natural disasters. I'm originally from Louisiana, and there are people in Lake Charles that still don't have power as a result of Hurricane Laura. There's a lot to keep folks up at night, not to mention your brand, your company's reputation, but more importantly, all of your stakeholders. And how do you help them get through this and come out better on the other side? Because again, if you're not impacted physically, the isolation has to impact you on some level mentally. And then there are so many people that have taken such a financial hit in 2020. I just think that we need to make it a moral imperative of society to just be better and do better. And then the upside of all of the tragedy of the racial injustice that we have seen come to the forefront is the fact that it's at the forefront of the American consciousness in a way it hasn't been before, at least in my lifetime. And we have an opportunity there, and we can't squander it. This is an opportunity to make real substantive change. And I think if we could find the goodness, find the moral imperative to be better, to do better, if that's what comes out of 2020, I'll sleep a lot better in 2021.
Brian, you got to follow that one.
That's lovely.
That's a tough one to follow. I'll say a couple of things. One, the question itself panics me because if I think about what's going to keep me up at night in 6 months, I was actually looking forward to getting a good night's sleep 6 months from now. So I was hoping we'd be a little bit past this. I don't know that I have a full answer to what I think is going to keep me up at night in 6 months. I do worry about the broader state of the economy. I worry about not having the crystal ball to be like, you know, I think there's changes. The things that have changed for brands, the things that have changed for us all, the way consumer behavior that affects me, and I'm just speaking on a business level, some of those changes are going to be permanent. And I don't know exactly what they're going to be. And I think there's going to be fallout from that. However, in a more positive note, I took over a division of a company one time when I worked at AOL, and when I went around and met everybody, all they wanted to do was complain, and there was everything wrong and everything was broken and nothing worked and everything. And I held a session with the entire group, and I called it "Get the Poison Out." And I was like, "We're just gonna let's take the complaints, let's get them all done." And then we wrote them all down. We got all the complaints. I'm talking like 7,500 people, and then we just erased them and said, "Okay, now let's start working on the solutions. We've gotten the poison out. Let's start working on the solutions and making this better." I'm hopeful that that's what 2020 is, that we got the poison out and then we can move forward and just work on solutions and making everything, whether it's, our neighborhoods, society, our country, our companies and businesses and industries, just a better place, more inclusive, something that we can be more proud of than we were walking into this year.
The three of y'all answered that question. Brian knows a couple of you. I also teach, and the other night it was my MBA class. we were talking about things, and one of them said, everybody always asks the question, what keeps you up at night? John, what keeps you going during the day? What gets you fired up? And you know what? Just listening to the three of y'all, you just talk about, you're right. It is about kindness. It is about, let's get back to just give me the facts. It's about treating people smart with respect. Brian Dolan, this is a great 40 minutes. I mean, these are three panelists. I've got some, can't wait to look at it. Thank all of y'all. And Catherine, I hope that it's safe. I know that you're in that rain down there. Please be safe. Michelle, thank you. I love what Jason does. I'm a big follower of DCN, and I think the impact of what you do. And Brian, obviously, we're going to learn more about your company. Please share that link about voting. That is powerful, because I don't think people really realize, and now that we've talked about the number of the newspapers and those local news sources, that connection, because we've just all sort of reinvented time.
I do want to say, though, that one of the biggest things I'm seeing right now among brands in general is this push to vote. So I'd encourage anybody who has any power in their brand, with their social platforms, with their reach, to get out there and help advocate voting, educate people on voting, and let's just keep making this all better.
Brian Dolan knows everywhere I go, I keep registration forms. I've registered 27 people since Sunday.
Wow, congrats, John. That's amazing.
Even Republicans. So, I mean, I live in San Francisco. So to me, you only have one obligation as a citizen, and it's to vote. And if you don't vote, I never listen to your complaint. So, so I'm a big believer that you got to speak up. Y'all have voted with your intelligence and your insights. And honestly, I hope the people, I see my friend Jim Conley on there and a few others. I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I have. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
really
guys.
appreciate everyone joining, and all of our guests today as well. This and all of our other Work Reduce Live panels are on our website and on the YouTube channel, where you can see this and pass it along to folks if you haven't. So I hope you'll join our next panel next week, which is about mindfulness in leadership, and really looking forward to that one. So thanks again to all our guests and our panelists. Hope you're all well. Thanks. Bye.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Having us.